The Middle Ages, the Church, Charlemagne, and feudalism. By the end of this video, you will be able to describe the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church, explain the purpose and activities of monks and nuns, characterize Charlemagne as a powerful leader, and explain the underlying beliefs behind the feudal system. The Roman Catholic Church. The hierarchy or structure of the church in the Middle Ages was as follows. There were local communities of Christians that were called parishes, and each parish was led by a priest. Groups of parishes were known as a diocese or a bishopric, led by a bishop. Groups of dioceses were led by an archbishop, and the archbishops were led by the Pope, who is considered the overall leader of the Roman Catholic Church or the Universal Church. Special church communities were called monasteries, and these were religious settlements that were built in rural areas for the purpose of being ideal Christian communities. Men who called themselves monks lived there to devote their lives to God. Women who lived in similar communities, separate apart from men, the women's communities were called convents, and the women were known as nuns. The head of the monastery was an abbot, and the head of the convent was an abbess. The activities that would be conducted would include physical work in order to support the monastery, prayer, meditation, reading, and chanting of the Psalms. Each community was self-sustaining, independent, and isolated from worldly influences. Both monks and nuns lived by strict rules that were written by Benedict and also adopted by his sister Scholastica. Let's review some of the rulers of the Middle Ages that we've already talked about. Gregory I consolidated power for the Pope by giving the papacy both spiritual and secular powers. He began to, as Pope, not only rule in spiritual matters, but he used monies that were collected by the church for secular things like providing security and protection. He really became a political leader as much as he was a religious leader. Clovis led the Franks, who had one of the strongest kingdoms in Western Europe in the early Middle Ages, and he ruled over the area that became modern-day France. After Clovis, we saw the emergence of a family, a dynasty, called the Carolingians. The first leader of the Carolingians was a man named Charles Martel, which literally means Charles the Hammer, who defeated the Muslims at Tours in Spain and expanded the kingdom's territory. After his death, his son, Pepin the Short, took over. He was named king by the grace of God by the Pope because he was willing to take his forces and help to defend Rome against a group called the Lombards in Italy. Pepin the Great's son was known as Charles the Great or Charlemagne. He expanded his territorial control across Western Europe, expanding the empire that his grandfather and father had begun. He was crowned Holy Roman Emperor by Pope Leo III. He's really the first leader in Europe of a large territory since the collapse of the Roman Empire. He limited the power of nobles, and he administered his empire through counts or local officials whose actions were monitored by the Missi Dominici, who were messengers of the Lord King. So while he governed a large area, he kept it under pretty close supervision using a bureaucracy or network of local officials and messengers. And the empire represented a blend of Roman, Christian, and Germanic elements. This is why it was called the Holy Roman Empire. Charlemagne's personal characteristics included his athleticism, his charisma. He was an eloquent speaker. He understood Greek and maybe Latin, although we don't know for sure that he could actually read and write in Greek or Latin. Those were his spoken languages. And like his grandfather and his father, he left his empire to his son. As an administrator, he was organized, he delegated authority, he kept local laws, divided his kingdom into districts, and used these messengers, the Missi Dominici, to help keep him informed of what's going on. He was known as a conqueror who who built territorial security with aggressive tactics. He was a patron of learning. While we don't know for sure if he could read and write himself, we know that he understood the need for educated people to help run the government. So he revived the classical studies of Greek and Latin. He worked to preserve Latin culture, and he established schools throughout the empire. Once Charlemagne died, his territories were divided, they were invaded, and eventually conquered. And that was the end of the Carolingians as a ruling family. For protection, people turned to local nobles or landowners who could offer them security in exchange for service. And this is the beginning of the system we know as feudalism. Some key terms in feudalism are vassal, which is a man who serves a lord in a military capacity in exchange for land and protection. Homage is the official act of allegiance and submission to one's lord. So when a vassal paid homage to his lord, he was saying in an official way that he would be loyal and serve that lord. And a fief was a grant of land that was made to a vassal. The feudal contract required a vassal to serve his lord for a minimum of 40 days a year. When asked, a vassal had to appear at his lord's court. He had to make financial payments to his lord on certain special occasions, including things like birthdays and anniversaries. And the lord had to grant land and military or legal protection to the vassal. In this feudal society, it was dominated by warfare, not unlike Japan was with the samurais in roughly the same time period. The knights were the warriors, and knights could be both rich people and commoners. They held tournaments where they practiced and displayed their skills in combat, like jousting, and they lived by a code of chivalry, which was a system of ethical behavior that required them to defend the church and any people who could not protect themselves, to treat captives with honor, and to fight for glory rather than material rewards.